Oppression is not just the act of chaining a person's body, it is the slow, grinding weight that crushes the soul. When we look at history, especially in the 18th century, we often see grand stories of kings, merchants, priests, and wars. But hidden beneath those glittering records lies a darker truth. Entire communities lived under chains, silenced by the arrogance of power. Carmen de Puebla's story is a brutal reminder of what oppression does to the human heart. She was not born violent. She did not come into the world with rage in her blood. No, she was born like any other child, with laughter, with the capacity for love, with a family that surely cherished her. But slavery tore all of that away. Stripped from her homeland, sold in markets, renamed, and forced to serve, she became an object in the eyes of her masters. This is the first wound oppression inflicts. It tells a person, you are not human, you are property. Day after day, Carmen lived in an environment where her voice did not matter. If she cried, no one comforted her. If she prayed, no one listened. If she dreamed, no one cared. She was punished for mistakes that children of the household were forgiven for. She was beaten for errors that free men and women would laugh off. Over time, this kind of treatment builds a storm within a person. They may not show it outwardly, but inside, a fire begins to grow. This is what desperation truly is, not simply hunger or poverty, but the sense that life has been stripped of meaning, that no matter how hard you work, no matter how many tears you shed, you will never be seen as equal. Oppression is not just physical pain, it is psychological starvation, and when people starve long enough, they begin to take desperate measures to feel alive again. History shows us this pattern over and over again. When slaves in Haiti rose up in 1791, they were not moved by sudden hatred, but by centuries of cruelty. When peasants across Europe stormed castles and burned estates, it was not because they were naturally violent, but because oppression had cornered them into desperation. Human beings, when treated with dignity, are capable of love, peace, and generosity. But when dignity is stripped away, what remains is raw survival, and survival often takes the form of rebellion. For Carmen, the hypocrisy of her oppressors must have been unbearable. During Holy Week, she watched her masters kneel in church, reciting prayers of mercy, forgiveness, and humility. She watched the children dressed in white, carried through processions as symbols of purity. And all the while, she carried scars on her back from their whips, bruises from their punishments, and a soul weighed down by humiliation. Imagine the confusion of living in a world where those who preached about a God of love treated you worse than a beast of burden. That contradiction itself is oppression. It tells the victim that even God has abandoned them. Desperation is born in silence. Carmen never had the power to voice her pain. Her cries would not be believed. Her tears would not move her mistress's heart. The city around her would never stand up for a slave, so where could she take her pain? She buried it inside, and when pain is buried too deep for too long, it erupts in sudden, uncontrollable ways. This is why her act, burying the master's 4 children alive, though horrifying, becomes tragically understandable. It was not logic that guided her, but desperation. Oppression had taken everything from her, her family, her future, her faith. In that moment, she reclaimed a twisted form of power. For once in her life, she controlled the fate of others. And while history condemns her act, we must not ignore the truth that gave birth to it. Desperation is the child of oppression. For us today, the lesson is clear. Whenever we see people lashing out, rebelling, or even turning violent, we must look deeper than the act itself. What pain lies beneath? What silence has been forced upon them? Oppression does not always look like chains in the 21st century. It can look like poverty, discrimination, abuse, or neglect. And every time we ignore someone's dignity, we risk planting seeds of desperation that may one day erupt in destructive ways. We must never underestimate the power of treating people with humanity. A kind word, fair treatment, and respect can change the course of a person's life. But oppression, systematic, unrelenting, daily oppression, leads to desperation that consumes both the oppressed and the oppressor. For the master in Puebla, his wealth and power could not save him from the consequences of cruelty. For Carmen, her desperation robbed her of peace and led her to a tragic end. Both were destroyed, because oppression always destroys. So let this keynote echo through history. Oppression breeds desperation. When you dehumanize someone, you strip away not just their freedom, but your own safety, your own humanity. You cannot chain another human being without chaining yourself to their eventual rebellion. Carmen's story, as haunting as it is, should remind us of this eternal truth. If we want peace, we must practice justice. If we want safety, we must give dignity. And if we want love, we must live it, not just preach it. For oppression is a poison, and desperation is its inevitable deadly fruit. Faith is meant to be light. It is supposed to be the voice that calls people to love, to mercy, to justice. True faith lifts the broken, defends the weak, and softens the hearts of the powerful. But when faith becomes a mask, when people kneel in churches while standing tall in cruelty, what was meant to be holy turns into hypocrisy, and hypocrisy is often more dangerous than open wickedness because it hides evil beneath the cloak of righteousness. The story of Carmen de Puebla, the enslaved woman in 1742, reveals this collision between faith and hypocrisy in the most chilling way. The family that owned her lived in one of the most devout Catholic cities of the Spanish colonies. Puebla was famous for its churches, its Holy Week processions, its elaborate rituals of penance and praise. For outsiders, it looked like a city drenched in holiness. Bells rang through the streets, incense filled the air, and families like Carmen's masters were at the center of it all, front row at Mass, carrying candles, bowing their heads in public prayer. But behind those church walls, hypocrisy thrived. The same hands that folded in prayer had struck Carmen. The same mouths that whispered holy hymns had spit words of hatred at her. The same parents who dressed their children in white robes of innocence had forced another mother's daughter into chains. What faith is that if not hypocrisy? What good is religion if it does not change how you treat the most vulnerable person under your roof? Carmen must have watched this contradiction with eyes full of confusion and anger. She saw the mistress of the house lecture about humility, yet shout orders with cruelty. She saw the master donate to the church, yet starve the very people who made his wealth possible. During Holy Week, she saw children carried like angels in public, while she was whipped for the smallest mistake. Every prayer they prayed must have sounded like an insult in her ears. This is the dangerous power of hypocrisy. It destroys the credibility of faith. When people claim to honor God but deny the dignity of others, they turn the name of God into a weapon, and weapons always leave scars. Hypocrisy is not only a betrayal of others, it is a betrayal of the very faith it pretends to represent. If faith is meant to bring love, then hypocrisy makes it hateful. If faith is meant to bring freedom, hypocrisy uses it to justify slavery. And when this contradiction is lived out every day, those who suffer under it begin to lose hope, not just in people, but in God Himself. For Carmen, every whip, every insult, every false prayer was another reason to believe that God had abandoned her. And what could be more devastating than that? Her act, burying the children alive, was not only a cry of desperation. It was also a brutal rejection of the hypocrisy that surrounded her. If her master's faith meant mercy, why did they never show her mercy? If their prayers meant forgiveness, why was she never forgiven? If their Holy Week was about remembering the suffering of Christ, why did they inflict suffering on her every single day? Here lies the collision. Faith and hypocrisy cannot exist side by side forever. Sooner or later, the truth will be revealed, the oppressed will rise, the masks will fall, and the prayers that were empty will be exposed for what they were. This lesson echoes into our world today. How many people turn away from faith not because of God, but because of the hypocrisy of those who claim His name? How many children lose belief when they see parents preach kindness in public, yet live with cruelty at home? How many communities crumble because leaders speak of morality, yet live in corruption? Faith without action is empty. Words without compassion are noise, and religion without love is nothing more than a ritual that deceives. The scriptures themselves say, faith without works is dead. Carmen's masters practiced a faith that was dead, and in the collision between their empty prayers and their real cruelty, tragedy was born. But there is hope in this truth as well. If hypocrisy destroys faith, then authenticity restores it. If cruelty hides behind prayer, then true love can reveal the power of real faith. Every one of us has a choice. Will our faith be a mask, or will it be a mirror of our actions? The collision between faith and hypocrisy is not just history, it is present. Every time we claim to be people of integrity, yet lie in secret, we repeat this story. Every time we say we believe in kindness, yet act with cruelty, we repeat this story. Every time we preach forgiveness but hold on to bitterness, we repeat this story. Hypocrisy is not only the sin of Carmen's masters, it is a danger that waits for all of us if we are not watchful. The story of Carmen de Puebla forces us to ask, what does my faith look like in the eyes of those who suffer around me? To the hungry, does my faith look like food or false words? To the oppressed, does my faith look like justice or judgment? To the lonely, does my faith look like comfort or condemnation? If we cannot answer these questions with love, then we are no better than those who prayed in Puebla's cathedrals while whipping a slave in their courtyard. So let this keynote speak clearly. Faith and hypocrisy cannot walk together. One will always betray the other. If we want our faith to be real, it must show in our hands, our hearts, our homes, and our actions. The world does not need more words of religion, it needs lives that prove love. Carmen's story is tragic, but it shines a spotlight on this eternal truth. Her masters wore the mask of faith, but lived in the shadow of hypocrisy. And when faith collides with hypocrisy, it is always the innocent who suffer. May we learn from their failure, and may our faith be the kind that heals, not the kind that hides. There is a sound in history that is louder than any church bell, louder than any cannon, louder than the shouts of kings and rulers. It is the silent cry of the enslaved. You may not hear it in official records, you may not find it written in the books of the powerful, but it echoes across generations. It is the cry of people stripped of freedom, dignity, and voice. And though it is silent, it is never weak. It is a sound that has changed nations, toppled empires, and carved scars into the conscience of humanity. Carmen de Puebla was one of those silent voices in 1742. She was a young woman enslaved in a home where words had no worth. If she spoke of her pain, no one listened. If she complained of injustice, no one cared. If she cried in the night, her tears dried alone. For her masters, her silence was convenient. They mistook it for obedience, for acceptance, for submission. But what they could not see was that her silence was filled with unspoken screams. This is the tragedy of slavery. It demands silence. It demands that people suffer without protest, that they bury their anger, their grief, their dreams deep inside where no one can see. It forces men and women to smile when they are broken, to serve when they are dying, to sing when they are grieving. Silence becomes their only defense, because a spoken word of rebellion might cost them their life. But silence is not the absence of pain, it is pain amplified. A silent cry is heavier than a shouted one. Because a shout releases something. It lets anger escape, it lets sorrow be heard. But silence keeps everything inside, pressing down like a stone on the chest. Carmen's silent cry lasted years. Every insult, every whip, every humiliation piled onto her heart until the silence was unbearable. And when silence finally broke, it broke violently. We see this same pattern repeated through history. The enslaved Africans in the Caribbean sang hymns that seemed joyful to their masters, but hidden in those songs were codes of escape, messages of hope, whispers of freedom. Their silence in public was filled with cries in secret. The enslaved in the American South worked in fields, heads down, lips sealed, but in the secrecy of night they prayed prayers the masters could never control. Their silence was not weakness, it was the seed of something greater. The danger of ignoring the silent cry is that eventually silence erupts. Just as rivers carve valleys through rock, so too do silent cries carve through society until the weight of injustice collapses. Carmen's act of burying her master's 4 children alive was horrific, yes, but it was also the eruption of years of silence. She had no courtroom to plead her case, no preacher to defend her dignity, no neighbor to hear her sorrow. Her silent cry had no outlet, and so it came out in the most destructive way imaginable. The lesson for us today is simple: never ignore the silent cries around you. There are people right now who smile in public but weep in private. There are men and women working quietly under crushing burdens, too afraid or too exhausted to speak. There are children in homes who never say a word about their pain, yet their silence is a scream for help. To ignore these silent cries is to repeat the mistake of the past, to believe silence means peace, when in truth, silence often means suffering. Slavery may not exist in the same legal form today, but its shadow lingers in poverty, abuse, injustice, and discrimination. There are modern slaves working in factories, hidden behind supply chains, whose silent cries echo in every product we consume. There are migrants exploited, voices stolen, stories erased. And there are everyday people, neighbors, colleagues, even friends, who carry silent cries we fail to notice because we are too busy, too distracted, too unwilling to listen. Listening to the silent cry is more than hearing words. It is seeing with compassion, feeling with empathy, acting with courage. It means asking, who is suffering in silence around me, who has no voice, yet carries wounds in their heart. It means refusing to be like Carmen's masters, blind to the humanity of the person serving them. The truth is, silence always speaks. It's just a matter of whether we are willing to hear it. A quiet look in someone's eyes can tell the story of years of oppression. A bowed head can reveal a lifetime of shame. A soft "I'm fine" can hide oceans of pain. The question is, do we see it, or do we pretend silence means everything is well? Carmen's story teaches us what happens when silent cries are ignored. They transform into storms. They turn into desperate acts. They bring tragedy for both the oppressed and the oppressor. If her masters had ever stopped to truly listen, not just to her words, but to her silence, perhaps history would be different. Perhaps she would not have buried those children, and perhaps she would not have died as a warning to others, but they did not listen. They chose blindness over compassion, and the cost of ignoring a silent cry was blood in their home. For us, the challenge is clear. Be the kind of person who hears the silence. Be the kind of leader, neighbor, friend, and believer who looks beyond appearances. When we choose to listen deeply, when we choose to notice the unspoken pain, we break the cycle of oppression. We give the silent a voice, and in doing so, we prevent desperation from becoming destruction. So remember this keynote: the silent cry of slaves still echoes. It echoes in history, it echoes in our present, and it will echo into the future unless we learn to listen. To hear the silence is to save a life. To ignore it is to invite tragedy. Carmen's story is not only about what she did. It is about what was never done for her. No one heard her silent cry. Revenge is one of the darkest fires that burns in the human heart. But contrary to what many believe, revenge is not born from strength. It is born from deep, festering pain. Those who feel powerless, humiliated, and wounded often carry the heaviest desire for revenge. It is the response of a soul that has been denied justice for too long, a cry for balance in a world where cruelty has gone unanswered. Carmen de Puebla's story in 1742 illustrates this truth with haunting clarity. She was an enslaved woman in a household of wealth and religion, stripped of her freedom, her dignity, and even her name. Every day was a reminder that she was seen not as human, but as property. Her back bore the scars of lashes, her spirit carried the weight of humiliation, and her heart was crushed under the hypocrisy of masters who prayed in church but showed no mercy at home. Carmen had no power in her life. She had no voice in court, no protection under law, no allies in society. Every door of justice was shut to her, and when people are denied justice long enough, they begin to crave revenge, not because they are strong, but because pain leaves them no other outlet. Her act of burying the master's 4 children alive was not born from power, but from years of suppressed agony. She had no armies, no weapons, no political voice. All she had was pain, and pain became her weapon. This is the tragedy of revenge. It does not heal, it does not restore dignity, it does not truly satisfy the heart that has been broken. It is the desperate act of someone who cannot find another way to make their suffering visible. Carmen's revenge was horrific, but it was also a mirror reflecting the cruelty that shaped her life. Her oppressors created the pain, and out of that pain, revenge was born. We see this truth across history. When the oppressed rise against empires, when the abused turn on their abusers, when the forgotten lash out in ways that shock the world, it is never simply about power, it is about pain. A slave rebellion, a desperate act of violence, a sudden explosion of rage. These are not signs of strength, but of wounds that have festered too long without care. Revenge, then, should not be seen only as a crime, but also as a symptom. A symptom of injustice left unresolved, a symptom of pain ignored, a symptom of silence that has gone unheard. Carmen's act was condemned, and rightly so for its cruelty, but the deeper truth is that her revenge was born from the pain inflicted upon her. If her life had been different, if she had been treated with dignity, if her humanity had been respected, her hands would never have touched the soil that became the grave of innocent children. The lesson for us today is powerful. When we inflict pain, we plant the seed of revenge. Parents who mistreat children may one day face their silent rebellion. Leaders who exploit their people may one day be overthrown. Friends who betray friends may one day taste the bitterness of betrayal themselves. Pain never disappears, it transforms. And when it transforms into revenge, it rarely comes back gently. But there is another truth here. Revenge is a cycle. The pain of one leads to revenge, which causes pain to another, which breeds more revenge. Carmen's act, born of her pain, created new pain for her master and his wife, who lost their children. That pain, in turn, fueled society's anger toward Carmen, leading to her brutal execution. Pain gave birth to revenge, revenge gave birth to more pain, and the cycle consumed everyone involved. This is why revenge never truly solves anything. It does not end the suffering, it multiplies it. So what do we learn from this? We learn that the true path forward is not revenge, but justice. Justice acknowledges pain, confronts cruelty, and restores dignity without creating more destruction. If Carmen's pain had been seen, if her humanity had been defended, if her masters had chosen justice over hypocrisy, then revenge would never have been born. Her silence would have been heard, her suffering eased, and history might have told a story of redemption instead of tragedy. Revenge is a warning sign. When we see people thirsting for revenge, we must not only condemn their actions, we must ask what pain gave birth to this. Only by addressing the root can we prevent the fruit. Society must learn this truth, or else we will repeat the cycle of Carmen's story forever. For you and me, this keynote carries a personal lesson. Each of us has been hurt by someone. Each of us has carried pain that whispers, "Get even, make them feel what you felt." But revenge is a liar. It promises relief, but delivers more chains. The fire of revenge may burn brightly for a moment, but in the end, it consumes the one who carries it. True strength is not in revenge, but in breaking the cycle. It is in finding justice where possible, healing where necessary, and refusing to let someone else's cruelty turn us into what we hate. Carmen's revenge was born of pain, not power, and that is the tragedy. Her pain was real, her suffering was unbearable, but her response only deepened the darkness. If we learn anything from her story, it must be this: when pain is left to grow unchecked, it will always give birth to revenge. And revenge will always destroy more than it heals. Let us then be people who confront pain with compassion, not cruelty, who answer injustice with justice, not vengeance, who see the wounds of others and bring healing, instead of forcing them into silence. Because when revenge is born of pain, everyone loses, but when justice is born of compassion, everyone wins. History has a strange way of speaking. Kings and rulers write their victories in stone, priests carve their sermons into cathedrals, and merchants leave behind records of trade and wealth. But beneath these official stories lie other truths that are buried, whispered, and often feared. These truths do not always appear in textbooks or archives, but they remain alive in memory, in legend, in the conscience of humanity. The story of Carmen de Puebla in 1742 is one of those buried truths. The records of her life are scarce, written not by her but by those who condemned her. The masters, the priests, the authorities. They wanted the story told in a way that preserved their honor and justified their power. To them, Carmen was a monster, a slave who committed an unthinkable act by burying 4 innocent children alive during Holy Week. But what they did not write down, what they buried, was the truth of why it happened. Yet history has a way of remembering what is buried. Even if it is not written in official records, it survives in whispers, in stories passed from generation to generation. It survives in the unease of those who walk past the old houses of Puebla, in the warnings parents tell their children, in the rumors that surface during Holy Week. It survives because truth cannot remain buried forever. Carmen's act was horrific, but the truth beneath it was even more haunting. She was not born evil, she was made desperate, and history remembers not only what she did, but what was done to her. It remembers the cruelty of masters who prayed in churches while abusing their slaves. It remembers the hypocrisy of a society that celebrated the innocence of some children while stripping away the humanity of others. It remembers that behind every violent act lies a hidden story of pain. This is how history works. The official story is often written by the powerful, but the buried truths live on because they speak to the conscience of people. You cannot bury injustice forever. You cannot silence the cries of the oppressed forever. You cannot erase pain by punishing the one who revealed it. Carmen may have been executed, but her story survived, and in surviving, it exposes the truth that her masters wanted to hide. Oppression creates monsters not by nature, but by nurture. Think about it. How many stories like Carmen's lie buried in history? Stories of slaves whose voices were never heard, women whose pain was never recorded, children whose cries were dismissed. For every one story we know, there are 1,000 that remain hidden in shadows. But just because they are buried does not mean they are gone. They live on in collective memory, waiting for someone to uncover them, to speak them aloud, to let the truth breathe again. This keynote is a reminder for us today: you cannot bury the truth. It always finds a way back to the surface. Leaders may try to cover corruption, but history will remember. Abusers may try to silence their victims, but history will remember. Entire societies may try to erase the crimes they committed, but history will remember. Because truth is like a seed, it may be buried for a season, but eventually it will grow, and when it grows, it shakes the ground beneath it. In Carmen's case, her act became a buried truth that exposed a society's hypocrisy. For her masters, the tragedy was about 4 children lost. For the community, it was about a slave who turned violent. But history whispers another truth. It was about the pain of a woman who had been enslaved, silenced, and dehumanized until her silence exploded into horror. That buried truth continues to speak centuries later, warning us of what happens when cruelty is left unchecked. The motivation for us today is clear. We must not be afraid to uncover buried truths, whether in history, in our families, or in ourselves. The truth may be painful, it may be uncomfortable, but it is the only path to healing. A society that buries its sins will one day be forced to face them in uglier forms, but a society that uncovers them and learns from them will build a stronger future. Ask yourself, what truths have we buried today? Do we hide the suffering of workers behind cheap products? Do we bury the pain of the poor beneath glamorous lifestyles? Do we silence the cries of those treated unjustly because it is easier not to hear them? If so, then Carmen's story reminds us that these truths will not stay buried. They will rise, and when they do, they will demand a reckoning. The same is true on a personal level. Many of us carry buried truths in our own hearts, pains we do not speak of, wounds we do not admit, mistakes we try to cover, but burying them does not erase them. They stay alive, shaping our thoughts, fueling our anger, guiding our actions in ways we may not even understand. Like Carmen, we may think silence protects us, but eventually the buried truth rises, and if it rises without healing, it can come out in destructive ways. So the lesson is this: face the truth before history forces it out. Listen to the buried cries before they turn into storms. Confront injustice before it turns into rebellion. Heal your wounds before they turn into revenge, because what is buried is never gone. Carmen's story proves it. Her masters tried to bury the truth of her pain under rituals and religion. The city tried to bury her name under condemnation. But centuries later, we are still telling her story, not because of what the official records say, but because of what the buried truth reveals. History remembers. It remembers not only the victories of the powerful, but also the cries of the powerless. And in that memory lies our warning and our hope. The truth may be buried, but it will never die. Every story in history, no matter how dark, carries a mirror. It does not exist only for scholars to analyze or for museums to preserve. It exists for us, the living, to reflect upon. The story of Carmen de Puebla is not simply about one woman, one act, or one tragedy. It is about humanity. It is about you and me, and the greatest mistake we can make is to think this story belongs to the past alone. The lesson for us today is that the pain of the oppressed, if ignored, will always rise, and it will rise in ways that shake the world. Carmen was born into chains, raised in silence, and shaped by cruelty. By the time her voice was heard, it was too late. The world only listened when her silence broke into horror. That is the tragedy we must learn from. Because in our world today, there are still chains, some physical, some emotional, some invisible. There are still people forced into silence. There are still cries ignored until they explode. The lesson for us is this: we cannot afford to ignore pain, whether it belongs to others or to ourselves. When injustice is left unchallenged, it does not disappear. It festers, it builds pressure, it waits. Carmen's masters believed their cruelty was justified because the law allowed it, the church overlooked it, and society accepted it. But cruelty never goes unpunished, even when the punishment comes in unexpected ways. Today, when we see corruption in governments, exploitation in businesses, or abuse in relationships, we must remember this lesson. Silence allows evil to grow. If we ignore it, it will not vanish. It will strike back. Carmen's silence was her prison. She endured, she obeyed, she suffered. But she did not have the freedom to speak her truth. And when truth is buried too long, it does not disappear, it erupts. Many of us carry buried truths within ourselves. Painful childhoods, broken dreams, betrayals we never healed from. We think staying silent will protect us, but silence is dangerous. The lesson for us is to speak, to share, to seek healing before silence transforms into destruction. It is easy to judge Carmen as a murderer, and many did. But history whispers a deeper lesson. Judgment without compassion blinds us to the truth. Her masters judged her, the city condemned her, and the church executed her. But none of them asked what created her desperation. The lesson for us is simple. When we see someone lash out, fall into addiction, or walk a destructive path, we must not stop at judgment. We must ask, what pain lies behind their choices? Compassion does not excuse wrongdoing, but it helps us see the humanity within the brokenness. Carmen's story warns us of what happens when truth is buried. For societies, this means confronting their darkest histories, slavery, oppression, genocide, rather than rewriting them. For individuals, it means acknowledging wounds rather than hiding them. Healing can never come through denial. The lesson for us is this: truth may be painful, but it is the only road to freedom. What we refuse to face will eventually face us, and often in harsher ways. Perhaps the most hopeful lesson from Carmen's tragedy is this: cycles of pain can be broken, but only when someone chooses differently. Carmen did not choose differently because she was never given the chance. But we have that chance. Every time we choose kindness over cruelty, truth over silence, compassion over judgment, we break the cycle. We ensure that buried pain does not become inherited pain. We change the story. Finally, the lesson is that history is not about the past, it is about the present. Carmen's story may have unfolded in 1742, but its truths are alive today. We live in a world where millions are still enslaved, though the chains look different. We live in a world where women are still silenced, where the poor are still invisible, where trauma is still buried in families for generations. If we fail to see these truths, we will repeat the same cycles of pain. So, what is the lesson for us today? It is this: we must not wait for buried truths to explode. We must uncover them with courage, confront them with compassion, and heal them with love. Look around you. Who is suffering in silence that you could lift up? What injustices are being buried that you could speak against? What pain in your own heart needs healing before it becomes something darker? The lesson for us is not to turn away, not to forget, not to bury, but to remember, to act, and to heal. Because if we do not learn from Carmen's silence, we risk creating another Carmen in our own time. Another soul crushed until it can bear no more. Another tragedy born not from evil alone, but from a world that refused to listen. Let us be the generation that listens, the generation that speaks truth before it is forced out, the generation that chooses compassion over judgment, healing over silence, justice over complacency. That is the true lesson for us today. And if we can carry that lesson forward, then perhaps Carmen's story, though tragic, will not be in vain. Perhaps her buried truth will become a seed, not of horror, but of wisdom, not of revenge, but of redemption. The lesson for us today is simple, yet eternal. Face the truth, heal the pain, and never allow silence to bury the humanity of another soul.